He cannot move. Paul Heyman, the most brilliant, the most decorated, the most comprehensively influential managerial mind in the entire history of professional wrestling, is lying in a hospital bed right now, unable to move. Paralyzed. The word itself feels wrong in the context of a man whose entire existence has been defined by motion, the constant, restless, endlessly creative motion of a mind that never stopped working, never stopped calculating, never stopped finding angles and opportunities and narrative constructions that everyone else in the room had missed entirely. Paul Heyman paralyzed is not just a medical condition requiring treatment and rehabilitation and the long uncertain road of neurological recovery. It is the violent, deliberate, criminally targeted silencing of the most dangerous non-physical weapon professional wrestling has ever produced. Seth Rollins did this. The man who spent the better part of 2026 hiding behind a mask while terrorizing an entire WWE roster, who revealed himself at Elimination Chamber with the theatrical confidence of someone who believed his own invulnerability. Seth Rollins walked onto that Raw stage last night and delivered an assault on Paul Heyman so calculated, so specifically targeted in its physical execution, and so clearly designed to produce the maximum possible permanent damage that calling it a professional wrestling attack does not begin to capture the full horror of what the cameras captured and what the medical team that responded in its aftermath had to confront. This was not a wrestling angle that went too far. This was not competitive violence that exceeded its intended parameters in the heat of a live television moment. This was Seth Rollins making a decision about Paul Heyman's future and executing that decision with the cold, unhurried, frighteningly focused precision that has made the visionary the most dangerous figure in WWE throughout 2026. And the result of that decision is a man who cannot move lying in a hospital bed while professional wrestling tries to process the full weight of what was taken from it on Raw last night. Ring Grumble is not looking away from a single detail of this. This is the most important breakdown we have ever had to deliver, and we are going to give it everything we have. Let us begin with the history between Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman, because you cannot understand why Seth chose to make Paul Heyman his target on Raw last night, why he chose this specific man, this specific attack, this specific outcome, without understanding the full depth and the full complexity of what has existed between these two extraordinary professional wrestling minds throughout this remarkable and devastating 2026 calendar year. Paul Heyman's decision to abandon Roman Reigns and align himself with Logan Paul was the central strategic pivot of 2026's WWE narrative landscape, the move that repositioned every power relationship on the roster and created the specific conditions under which Seth Rollins' Mystery Attacker campaign ultimately played out. And Seth Rollins' Mystery Attacker campaign, every target selected, every timing decision made, every carefully executed strike across Royal Rumble and Raw and SmackDown and every other platform where the violence landed, played out in an environment that Paul Heyman's strategic choices had shaped. That intersection, the specific way that Heyman's 2026 decisions and Seth's 2026 campaign occupied the same narrative and organizational space while never directly confronting each other, created a tension and a debt that last night's Raw attack was Seth Rollins' chosen method of settling. Because here is the truth about Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman that the WWE Universe has perhaps not fully articulated even to itself, despite watching both men operate at the highest level throughout this extraordinary year. These are the two most intelligent people in WWE's current ecosystem, the most strategically sophisticated performer and the most strategically sophisticated manager. Two minds that operate on a frequency that most of the people around them can only partially access. And throughout 2026 those two minds have been circling each other, aware of each other's presence, aware of each other's capability, aware that a direct confrontation between them was eventually inevitable, while the surface narrative of mystery attacker campaigns and championship pursuits and faction warfare played out for everyone else to follow and analyze and debate. Last night on Raw was that direct confrontation. And Seth Rollins, the visionary, arrived at it with a plan and a capability and a cold conviction that Paul Heyman, for all his extraordinary strategic intelligence and all his decades of experience navigating WWE's most dangerous personalities and most volatile situations, was not equipped to survive. The Raw attack itself began in a way that Paul Heyman did not see coming, despite everything his intelligence and his experience should have told him about Seth Rollins' current state and Seth Rollins' current intentions. And that failure of anticipation, that specific, Fatal gap between what Heyman's strategic capabilities should have produced in terms of threat assessment and preparation and what actually happened when Seth Rollins appeared on Raw and moved toward him, is itself one of the most revealing and most disturbing elements of everything that transpired last night. Because Paul Heyman not seeing Seth Rollins coming, in the immediate aftermath of the Elimination Chamber unmasking and everything it revealed about Seth's capabilities and Seth's willingness to operate at the absolute extreme end of what professional wrestling's behavioral spectrum contains, that failure suggests something about Paul Heyman's psychological state in the days leading up to Raw that deserves serious attention. Paul Heyman has been shaken by 2026 in ways that his public persona has not fully communicated but that last night's events make retrospectively visible. The Logan-Paul alliance, for all the victories and all the momentum it generated, has been operating under the specific pressure of Seth Rollins' revealed presence as the mystery attacker and the questions that revelation raised about the reliability of Heyman's intelligence gathering and strategic assessment. A man whose entire professional value proposition is built on comprehensive situational awareness and superior analytical capability, discovering that Seth Rollins operated directly within his orbit throughout 2026 without detection. That discovery does something to a mind like Paul Heyman's that ordinary competitive setbacks do not do. It introduces doubt, and doubt in a strategic mind of Paul Heyman's caliber is not a minor complication. It is a structural crack that, under sufficient pressure, produces catastrophic failure. Seth Rollins found that crack on Raw last night, and he drove everything he had directly into it. The physical nature of the attack, the specific, deliberate manner in which Seth targeted Paul Heyman's body in ways that produced the paralysis now confirmed by medical sources, reveals something about Seth Rollins' current psychological state that should frighten every single person in that WWE locker room regardless of their current relationship with the visionary. This was not the violence of someone acting on rage or emotion or the kind of competitive fury that professional wrestling generates organically in its most heated moments. Rage produces sloppy violence. Emotion produces excessive violence that goes further than intended because the emotional state doing the driving has no internal stopping mechanism calibrated to a specific outcome. What Seth Rollins delivered to Paul Heyman on Raw last night was precise, controlled, targeted in ways that communicated clear and specific intent about the result being sought. Not maximum pain, not maximum spectacle, but maximum permanent damage to Paul Heyman's capacity to continue functioning as the strategic force that has shaped WWE's narrative landscape throughout 2026. Seth Rollins did not want to hurt Paul Heyman. He wanted to stop Paul Heyman. Permanently, completely, in the specific sense of removing from the professional wrestling environment the single mind capable of constructing the kind of opposition to Seth's own ambitions that Paul Heyman, operating at full capacity with full organizational resources and full strategic commitment, represents. The paralysis is not a side effect of the attack. It is the attack's intended outcome. And that specific, chilling calculation, that Seth Rollins thought through the permanent consequences of what he was doing and chose to do it anyway, is the most disturbing thing about Raw last night and the thing that most completely reveals who Seth Rollins actually is on the other side of the Elimination Chamber unmasking. The Raw roster's response to what was happening to Paul Heyman, the people who were present in that arena and backstage and who watched Seth Rollins deliver a career-altering assault on a man who has been connected to virtually everyone in that locker room at some point across his extraordinary career, tells its own story about where WWE's organizational culture stands in the wake of everything 2026 has produced. There was intervention, eventually. But the delayed and tentative quality of that intervention communicated something uncomfortable about the specific fear that Seth Rollins generates in the people around him now that the mask is off and the full scope of what he is capable of and willing to do has been publicly demonstrated across the entire year. Nobody wanted to be next. That is the specific, paralytic fear that Seth Rollins has cultivated throughout 2026 and that Raw last night demonstrated has reached a level where it compromises even the basic protective instincts that professional environments are supposed to generate in the people who share them. When Paul Heyman needed the locker room to step up and step in with the speed and the commitment that the situation demanded, when the most significant and most beloved non-performing figure in WWE's current ecosystem was being destroyed on live television, the locker room hesitated in a way that will haunt every individual who was present and did not act immediately for the rest of their time in this industry. Logan Paul's world has been fundamentally altered by what happened to Paul Heyman on Raw. The partnership that defined WWE's 2026 power landscape, the combination of Heyman's strategic genius and Logan Paul's physical gifts that produced the Royal Rumble destruction and the SmackDown demolitions and every other significant result that the alliance accumulated throughout this extraordinary year, that partnership has been targeted at its most essential and most irreplaceable component. Logan Paul can replace almost anything that the 2026 campaign required. He can find new allies. He can develop new strategies. He can continue to grow as a professional wrestler through his own considerable dedication and athletic capability. What Logan Paul cannot replace is Paul Heyman's specific, singular, completely irreplaceable strategic intelligence applied to his specific situation with the full commitment and the full creative investment that Heyman brought to every client relationship he ever entered. Seth Rollins knew that the attack on Paul Heyman was not just an attack on one man. It was an attack on Logan Paul's capability to operate at the level that Heyman made possible. It was a strategic decapitation, removing the head of an operation that cannot function at the same level without it. And it was executed with the specific, cold genius of the most dangerous strategic mind currently operating in professional wrestling. Seth Rollins is more Paul Heyman than Paul Heyman right now. And that specific, terrifying truth is the legacy of Raw last night. Paul Heyman lying paralyzed in a hospital bed is professional wrestling's grief to carry. Every championship he helped elevate. Every career he helped transform. Every promo that set a standard nobody else has reached. Every moment of genuine creative brilliance that he brought to an industry that needed his particular kind of brilliance more than it ever fully acknowledged while it had access to it. All of that is now Paul Heyman's legacy rather than his ongoing contribution. And the specific unfairness of that transition, from active participant to legacy, produced not by age or choice but by Seth Rollins' deliberate, calculated, permanent assault on Raw last night, is something that professional wrestling should not accept quietly or process quickly or move past without fully honoring the weight of what was lost. Paul Heyman deserved more. This industry owed him more than an attack on Raw and a hospital bed and the word paralyzed attached to his name. He gave everything to professional wrestling across a career defined by generosity of creative vision and commitment to excellence that this business has not always deserved and has not always recognized. The debt professional wrestling owes Paul Heyman is immense. And Seth Rollins collecting on that debt through violence rather than allowing it to be repaid through continued contribution is the specific injustice at the center of Raw last night that Ringrumble will not let pass without the full weight of its acknowledgement. Get in those comments right now with everything you are feeling about what Seth Rollins did to Paul Heyman on Raw last night. Is Seth Rollins now the most genuinely frightening figure in professional wrestling given the specific, permanent nature of what he did and what he was clearly willing to do to achieve it? How does Logan Paul respond to having his strategic foundation destroyed by the most dangerous mind in WWE? And what does the roster do? What does WWE as an institution do about a Seth Rollins who has now demonstrated he is willing to paralyze people to achieve his objectives? Share this video everywhere immediately because Raw last night was the most significant and most disturbing episode of WWE's flagship program in 2026 and Ringrumble is giving you the most complete and most honest breakdown of everything it means available anywhere right now. Like this video. Subscribe to Ringrumble. Turn on every notification because the road to WrestleMania just became the most morally urgent and most dramatically loaded stretch of WWE programming in recent memory and we are going to be right here for every single moment of it. Ringrumble. When WWE does something that cannot be ignored, we make sure you understand every single layer of why it matters. Always.